Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I'd like to start by offering my greetings to everyone and welcoming everyone this evening. Um, I know the schedule's been a little kind of up in the air and crazy the last few weeks, but thank you all for coming. A few weeks ago, right after I arrived here at this monastery, the abbot Ajahn Nando, he had to go to a ceremony in Adelaide. They were building a new chetty there, and they were putting the relics into the chetty. And he was talking about the chetty itself, and he was talking about the foundation there, and how Ajahn Kalyano was speaking about that, and comparing the chetty and the foundation to us in our practice. So when you're building the chetty, it's going to be several meters tall, but you have to dig down a few meters into the ground, 3, 4 meters, to really put in a proper foundation. Because without a proper foundation, without a deep, sturdy foundation, if something happens, that chetty is going to fall over. So say, there's a big storm or an earthquake or anything like that, without a foundation, the chetty will just fall over. And so, it's the same for us in our lives and in our practice. Um, if we really want to be able to weather those uncertainties in life, those unexpected things which happen in life, we've got to build a really deep foundation, a really strong, secure foundation. Because, again, in life, anything can happen at any time. It was one of Lumpur Cha's big teachings was this teaching of uncertainty, of mine, or it's not sure. So, just a few days ago, there was a very unexpected earthquake hit Burma and hit Thailand and hit Bangkok. So many years ago, I lived very close to Bangkok. I spent, about 4 years living just on the outskirts of Bangkok. Never any hint of an earthquake. I never thought there'd be an earthquake hitting Bangkok, but it did happen. And so, these uncertainties in life can come up. So we want to have a good, deep foundation in our practice to be able to weather these. So one of the things, we start off with our foundation is really working on our sila or our morality, our moral conduct, the way we behave by body and speech. So we really want to um, have this as really firm and are really devoted to this. So, the bare minimum is to try to keep the 5 precepts. So that's avoiding killing, avoiding stealing, avoiding sexual misconduct, avoiding lying, and avoiding intoxicants. But we can always expand on that more, so again, there's a lot of bad things you can do outside of the 5 precepts. So, there's a rule against killing, but in the 5 precepts doesn't say not hitting or not harming. But we can always take that on ourselves and develop it and go further with that. So for example, if something happens, unexpected at work, we've been building, comparing it to the chetty, we've been spending our whole life building this chetty, building this life for ourselves. So say with our job, our career, and then all of a sudden, something happens at work, our boss says something awful to us, and we respond with violence, we hit them. It can ruin our whole career. You could get fired, maybe never get a job in that field again. So basically that whole chetty we've been building has just toppled over. But when we have that foundation in our sila, we're able to weather that storm and not react very overtly to it. But we can also use this idea of building a foundation also with the practices that involve the mind. So in our mindfulness, in our in Thai, we always use this saying, satipanya, our mindfulness and wisdom, so that when we when these inevitable things in life do happen, we're not we don't crush, we don't fall over internally. So for example, this morning, well, there's no electricity in the monastery. It's been raining for many days now, and last night we had quite a big storm and knocked out the electricity, the whole area. But it knocked it down pretty late because one of the properties nearby was having some kind of very loud party leading up to that, but in the middle of the night. But afterwards, the electricity got knocked out, and so I came out this morning, and there was no electricity. So first thing I start thinking, I'm like, oh, how am I going to do my online teaching if there's no electricity? That means there's no internet, there's no computer, there's none of this stuff. And so, either, but going back to the practice as a foundation, you go to, okay, it's like this, so just accepting this is what's happening and not panicking over it, not getting really disturbed internally over it. Okay, this is how it is. And accepting, that this is how it is doesn't mean not doing anything about it, but it means that, internally we're accepting, okay, this is the situation. And once you've accepted like that, then you can work on trying to find solutions to fixing it. Um, so it's like the teaching I always love using of Lumpur Mahamorn was, so when we're doing our formal meditation, our sitting and walking, he said, that's like training. That's like you're in the gym, you're training to be a boxer. And he said, when you go out into the real world, that's like when you actually walk into the ring and you're actually fighting against someone, because that's when these things really do come up, and these circumstances and these different situations come up, and of course, like I was saying, they're always going to happen. We always have the unexpected things of life, and everyone always has that, oh, I never thought this would happen, or I'd never thought this would happen to me. But it always happens to somebody. And so we prepare for it beforehand. We can prepare ourselves mentally, and the Buddha actually even recommended preparing yourself externally for these things. So I remember I always thought, when I first started getting into Buddhism and reading Dhamma, I always thought the expectation is just, give up all your stuff, give up all your money, and just live as very simple as possible. And I think a lot of us, get that same feeling when we come new to Buddhism. So I remember reading this story many years ago, the biography of this English nun named Tenzin Palmo, and she went to India, to Ladakh, and she lived alone in a cave for, I think it was like 12 years. And she was talking about when she first started to get into Buddhism. I think she was living in London, and she started reading books. So she decided, she was going to give up all her stuff. So she took all her clothes and everything, gave them all to her mom, and was like, just give them all away. I don't want them. I don't need them anymore. And all she had left was like one yellow sweater and I think one skirt or something like that. And then she ended up joining the Buddhist Society of London. And she found out that actually everyone else hasn't done that. They're living very normally. But luckily, her mom did know her character, and so she had actually kept all the clothes in a cupboard. So she still had all of her stuff, hadn't all gone out to charity bin. But this is a feeling a lot of times we have. But in one of the suttas, the Buddha's talking about to lay people about how to spend their money and what to use their money for. And one of the things he recommended was actually having some savings put away for a rainy day. For He goes through all this list of things which can happen, and like there's like greedy relatives come from it, or time of illness, and what we'd call nowadays like a rainy day fund. And so, because, uncertain things come up. So, a few years ago, the pandemic, hit some people really hard. Some people, really lost everything during that time and didn't have savings, weren't prepared for it. But again, this doesn't mean you have to go and become, a full-on prepper and, dig yourself an underground bunker and fill it up with 10 years supply of food and more guns than the army has. You don't have to quite go that far, but if you want to, I mean, you're welcome to, not stopping you. But it's good that, again, we are coming back to this idea of, preparing ourselves for these inevitabilities which can come up in life. And so that's even part of one of the things we do with our mindfulness practice, our meditation practice. So, we're constantly working on letting mind states go. So, when strong mind state comes up and we want to panic, we learn how to let go of that, how to work on that, how to deal with that. And we're also preparing ourselves for some of these inevitabilities that are going to come to in life. Um, and it's in the morning and evening chanting we do on the five reflections, um, five things to be reflected on again and again, frequently reflected on is, these things of old age, sickness, death, separation from those things we love and hold dear. So, I gave a talk on it just recently, but it's one of those things, it sounds morbid, but it's like, no, we're actually preparing ourselves for life. This is just part of nature, how these things are going to go. Our bodies are part of nature, are a natural process. They're made up of different elements. Lumpur Liam was just here and giving a Dhamma talk about that. He's like, yeah, the body's made up of elements. You've got magnesium, you've got calcium, you've got carbon, you've got all these different elements in your body. And, they just, so it's just elements of nature, and they're going to follow um, nature, and they're going to, eventually wear down, break down, and fall apart. And so this is one of the ways when we start doing this, when we start really focusing on building a foundation, and we've been building it for a while, sometimes we'll get one of these like experiences where we actually run into some kind of difficulties. So, for example, something like this morning when the electricity was going out, it's like, okay, what am I going to do? And you actually, it's these are one of these times when it really like tests your practice, or in Thai we'd say like sop arom. So, and then sometimes you do good on it, and when you do good and you're like, oh, actually I managed to keep calm, I managed to remember the Dhamma and stuff, give yourself a nice pat on the back, give yourself some encouragement over that. But then there are going to be times when we don't, times when, say we do get angry and or do start freaking out, like, oh no, electricity's out. What am I going to do now? Oh, I'm going to let everyone down. And if that happens and you start, you know, um, feeling bad, or sorry, if you lose it and you don't really stick to your practice, don't be hard on yourselves over that. It's okay. It's a work in progress. Going back to Lumpur Mahamorn's comparison of, a boxer. When the boxer gets into the ring, no, very few boxers win every match. They win some, they lose some. And so it's, the same with us. Sometimes, we do quite well. Sometimes we don't do very well with our practice. But it's important for us just to keep going, to keep the practice going and try to keep it consistent. And this is one of the things which is, again, going to really help lead to us having this strong foundation is this idea of consistency in our practice. Because sometimes, we go through a period where we feel really encouraged and, we maybe listened to a great talk or had a great Dhamma conversation with a friend, or maybe we just did a retreat or something and we really want to put in a lot of practice, so we're going for it, and then we go through another time and we're not very encouraged, and maybe stress is getting to us, or we're just very distracted with other things, and then we don't practice so much. This is going to the results we're going to get are going to be inconsistent because the practice is inconsistent. So it's something we want to be able to keep going in a consistent manner. And, it's like Lumpur Cha used to say, if you feel like practicing, then practice. If you don't feel like practicing, practice. And so that we can get that consistency. And the way I see it, that's also part of having a strong foundation is that we're able to keep practicing consistently. It doesn't mean there aren't going to be ups and downs in our practice. Sometimes we do a little more, sometimes we do a little less. Especially, circumstances in life can really dictate how much time we have. So, for example, right now, the monastery I'm staying at, we're getting ready to put in the SEMA to do a SEMA ceremony. And this is the biggest ceremony a monastery usually ever has. And there's going to be over 70 monks coming from Thailand, many monks coming from interstate from the different cities in Australia. There's going to be a dozen monks ordained temporarily for the ceremony. So we're going to probably total have about 100 monks here. And right now there's three of us to do the work to get ready for it, or four, sorry, I'm here now, I'm the fourth. So it's a lot of work. We're working, morning to afternoon, morning to evening some days. So there's not the same amount of time, I'd have to do formal practice as I would if, say, I'm just living alone in a kuti, in a hut, in a dwelling, in some type of hermitage. But that's okay, that's just how it is. That's the um, just the circumstances that I'm in right now. So but you still try to keep some practice going on, not just like, okay, there's work right now. I'm just gonna put practice aside for a few weeks. No, you try to keep some going because some is better than none. Lumpur Chai used to say, plain rice is better than nothing. And so we do work on trying to keep our practice going, keep building that foundation and working on that foundation of, our sila and of our meditation and of our wisdom. So I'd like to offer this to everyone as a bit of a reflection for this evening.